Welcome to Polaris Live. This is your host, Sarwar Kashmiri. Thank you for joining us for today's discussion in our series focused on the U.S.-China relationship and its global implications as seen through the eyes of experts from around the world. This user-supported channel is brought to you live in conjunction with the Foreign Policy Association of New York. If you have a question during the show, please remember we are live and feel free to submit your question using the bar on the right-hand side of the screen. After the live event, you can also listen to these programs on your favorite podcast platform. A reminder, Polaris Live is a non-commercial, user-supported channel. Your support is vital to our work and is the reason we can continue to produce our forthright, cutting-edge discussions of the most consequential relationship of our time. Please go to my website, kashmiri.com, to subscribe and show your support. Thank you for being part of the conversation. President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump held a landmark summit meeting in Beijing last week that covered a number of outstanding issues, including trade, security, artificial intelligence, cross-investments. But China made it clear that Taiwan remains its most sensitive strategic issue, and China was looking for a statement from America that opposed the island's independence and reduced military support for Taiwan, a move that seems to have strong opposition in the U.S. Congress. To help us think through this contentious set of issues, we are joined today by Ms. Bonnie Glaser, a noted expert on U.S.-Taiwan relations. Ms. Glaser is Managing Director of the German Marshall Fund's Indo-Pacific Program. She is also a non-resident fellow with the Lowy Institute in Sydney, Australia, and a senior associate with the Public Forum. She is co-author of the best-selling U.S.-Taiwan Relations: Will China's Challenge Lead to a Crisis? She was previously senior advisor to Asia and the director of the China Power Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Glaser has worked at the intersection of Asia-Pacific geopolitics and U.S. policy for more than 3 decades. Her views are sought by leaders throughout Asia, Europe, and the United States. Welcome back to Polaris Live, Ms. Glaser. Delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me on, Sarwar.
Listen, Bonnie, President Trump and Secretary Rubio both insist that there has been no change in American policy towards Taiwan. No change to American policy towards Taiwan. You agree?
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that question, Sarwar. So I'll start by saying that President Trump had a very detailed conversation with Xi Jinping, and that shouldn't be surprising. We've seen with prior presidents that when a summit is held on Chinese soil, that Xi Jinping spends quite a bit of time talking about Taiwan. And I think he gave President Trump a history lesson. And we know that Trump referred to the fact that Taiwan had been part of China for thousands of years. And then I think he said it left and now China wants it back. Just one piece of evidence that Xi Jinping has shaped his thinking about Taiwan. So how this will translate into specific U.S. policies remains to be seen. And the most important thing that I think everybody is watching now is the arms sale to Taiwan, which is already set and should have been notified to Congress earlier this year. And let's tell your listeners very specifically, President Trump said that that arms sales to Taiwan are a useful negotiating chip. That's something a U.S. president has absolutely never said. And it is, in fact, I would say, violation of U.S. law if the United States doesn't sell arms to Taiwan, because the Taiwan Relations Act, passed by Congress in 1979, requires the United States to sell defensive weapons to Taiwan. So yes, the president gets to decide the timing and the content of packages, but not whether or not the United States sells arms to Taiwan. And the other thing that I want to flag here is what the president said about when he was asked about the 6 assurances. So we know in 1982, that President Reagan sent the 6 assurances to the leader in Taiwan. And there are different versions of the 6 assurances. They vary based on the verb that's used. But the one that refers to arms sales to Taiwan says essentially the United States has not agreed to consult with the PRC on arms sales to Taiwan. So it does refer to the past. It does not say will not do so. 2 out of the 6 assurances are future tense. Those are the U.S. will not play a mediation role between Taipei and Beijing, and the United States will not exert pressure on Taiwan to enter into negotiations with Beijing. But the one on arms sales does refer to past tense. But most people think about it as also having implications for the present and potentially the future. And I can tell you that U.S. officials usually in past administrations, I don't know about this one, but often kept an index card, in their desk or maybe even in their pocket, listing the 6 assurances because they understood that this is part of U.S. policy toward Taiwan. And what did President Trump say? Not verbatim, of course, but he said something like, well, that was a long, long time ago.
Yes.
The implication is he is not bound by them. And so if that's the case, yes, that would be a change in U.S. policy toward Taiwan. So these are the kinds of things we'll have to see going forward. Will the arms sale take place? Will the United States permit President Lai Ching-te from Taiwan to make a transit through the United States? That was held off last year because Lai was supposed to go to New York, and the Trump administration denied him the possibility of going through New York. So those are all things that I'm looking at.
Funny, I had this vision as you were talking about the American side pulling out these 3x5 cards and the Chinese side pulling out the little red book from Mao Zedong to make quite a spectacle. But Bonnie, I would like to, if you're okay with it, pursue this agreement, or the 6 agreements as you term them, because there is a feeling amongst people that I know that you cannot. I mean, that was the question from the reporters on the way back on the plane, Mr. Trump, that listen, we have an agreement that America will not negotiate or discuss arms shipments to Taiwan. And so you can't do it. And that's when, as you said, he said, well, listen, that was 1982 or whenever. And does America really want another war 9,000 miles away from its shores? So there is still that lingering misunderstanding. So I just want you to state very specifically that that is not the case, that we can discuss what we want. That's not the issue. Just clarify that, make it plain.
Well, let me at least just restate. They're the 6 assurances. There was never an agreement between the United States and China that the United States would allow China to decide whether or not we sell arms to Taiwan. The 1982 communique between the United States and China, that's something else than the 6 assurances. The 6 assurances followed the U.S.-China 3rd communique. We call it the August 17th communique. And in that communique, the United States did say that it would reduce the overall value. It would not exceed the overall value of arms that were sold to Taiwan to that point. and it would reduce over time what was sold to Taiwan and not exceed essentially the capabilities that had been provided to Taiwan. But in subsequent administrations, the United States concluded that commitment by the United States, which was vague to begin with, was contingent on whether or not Beijing was pursuing unification, its goal, with Taiwan through peaceful means. And the United States concluded that China was not relying on peaceful means, and therefore the United States should not be bound by the August 17th communique with China. Now, we can debate whether or not that's right, but let's at least acknowledge that a communique is not international law. It is a bilateral agreement.
Okay.
And the 6 assurances that were given to Taiwan have not been codified into law. They were, by the way, declassified for the first time in the first Trump administration. And so that up until then, people had revealed a little bit about them, but we didn't know exactly what those 6 assurances to Taiwan were. So those are now public, but there is now legislation in Congress. It's called the 6 Assurances Act. Some members of Congress do want to now codify this into law, but remains to be seen whether that will happen.
Thank you for that. So when Mr. Trump says that, reminds people that these assurances were some years ago, and he says that he is going to use, or is likely to use, the statement on Taiwan as a bargaining chip. There's nothing that he's doing that violates U.S. law. It may be U.S. policy, longstanding U.S. policy, but he's quite free to do that, right, Bonnie?
Unless he, over a period of time, does not sell arms to Taiwan, the provision of weapons to Taiwan is mandated in U.S. law in the Taiwan Relations Act.
Okay. And now I'm going to ask a controversial question. I recall when Cuba got missiles, nuclear-tipped missiles from the Soviet Union and started to put them in silos in Cuba, that America was extremely concerned that next door to it, even though Cuba was a sovereign country, that they could not have these weapons so close by. I also remember when the island of Grenada, that Cuba wanted to build an airstrip there. The United States decided that it couldn't build an airstrip so close to America, and that the Marines went in to stop that construction. So I ask you, that's the distance between Taiwan and China, right? I mean, so why shouldn't the Chinese be concerned and say, hey, you can't be doing all this stuff here? Isn't that a direct analogy?
Well, I don't think you'd find anybody in China that would believe that is a valid analogy, because the Chinese see Taiwan as part of China. And that's, of course, what Xi Jinping told President Trump. That Taiwan has always been part of China, and that it's a historical inevitability that it will be reunited, returned to China, that Taiwan has no sovereignty. It is Chinese sovereignty over Taiwan. So Cuba, of course, an independent, sovereign country. I think that the Chinese would bristle at the notion that they should draw any lessons from Cuba. They think that the United States has no right to sell weapons to Taiwan because Taiwan is part of China, and therefore the Chinese should have maybe veto power, or at least be able to shape U.S. decision making on everything related to Taiwan. So no, I think the Chinese would bristle at the notion that Cuba is analogous to Taiwan.
Right. And so let me ask you, if the U.S., does wind up changing its relationship with Taiwan, its view on Taiwan, what do you think is going to be what do you think is going to be the impact on America's policy around the world, on America's word around the world? Do you think this is going to hurt American foreign policy?
Well, Sarah, I think that's a very important question. And there are undoubtedly some countries in the world that believe that Taiwan is a unique case. It is sui generis. That if Taiwan is ultimately becomes part of China, that does not necessarily have implications for U.S. policy elsewhere. But I think there are a large number of countries, and particularly our allies, countries to which we have treaty commitments, who are already concerned about whether or not the United States would follow through on those commitments if there were to be a contingency. There are certainly concerns in countries like Japan and Korea. And if President Trump says Taiwan is 9,500 miles away, which, by the way, I think it's 9,500 kilometers, but we'll set that aside, then that's too far. The United States can't go there. Well, Japan, Korea, Australia is even farther. We do have treaty commitments to those countries. And so I think that if the United States were actually to abandon Taiwan, to say, we are not going to sell arms, we are not going to help Taiwan, we expect that it will be taken over in some peaceful way by China, we might still insist that it be peaceful, that would have incredibly profound and negative implications for U.S. standing around the world, for our alliances. And the implications would certainly go beyond Taiwan.
And the damage, you think, might be more than is happening with the American change of position seemingly about NATO?
Well, absolutely. First of all, the United States is not withdrawn from NATO, and none of our commitments in NATO have changed. If the United States were to withdraw from NATO, we might be having a different conversation. But I don't see that. And right now, NATO is having an internal discussion about the possibility, if the Strait of Hormuz is not reopened by next month in June, that there might actually be NATO ships that will be sent to reopen the strait. That is something so far NATO countries in Europe we're unwilling to do. So we will see whether or not that happens. But I highly doubt that in the remainder of the Trump administration that we will see the United States actually withdraw from NATO.
So let me change tacks a bit, Bonnie. I wanted to ask you, do you think China would accept a relationship with Taiwan that it has now with Hong Kong, where it has largely left Hong Kong, its economy, its position as a world trading hub, and so on alone? I mean, the Hong Kong dollar is still pegged to the U.S. dollar. The U.S. Federal Reserve Bank is still the Federal Reserve Bank of Hong Kong. Our monetary policy in the U.S. is Hong Kong's policy. So with the exception of having people on the legislature in Hong Kong, they seem to have left Hong Kong pretty much alone, and it works like a Swiss precision watch, as it always did. Do you think that kind of a relationship might be possible with Taiwan and Hong Kong?
Well, first, I would challenge your description. The the relationship between China and Hong Kong has fundamentally changed. Hong Kong is essentially just another Chinese city. The fact that the Hong Kong dollar still exists, I think, does not capture the entirety of what has happened in Hong Kong, where there is really, very little, if any, freedom of speech. And of course, the people of Hong Kong cannot really determine how they are represented, how they are ruled. There's been enormous changes in Hong Kong. And the fact that so many people who were arrested remained behind bars, Jimmy Lai just being the most well-known of them, I think speaks volumes about how China's crackdown in Hong Kong has led to the muting of dissent. But the second point that I'd like to make is that maybe the more important question is not what China would be satisfied with, but what Taiwan would be satisfied with. And the Taiwanese people generally do not support, at least the vast majority of them, do not support one country, two systems as a model for Taiwan. There was a very strong reaction in Taiwan when the crackdown really started in earnest under President Tsai Ing-wen. It was one of the reasons why she was reelected with such a large majority of the votes. So the Taiwanese have no interest in being treated like Hong Kong. Their history, their relationship with China is very, very different. After all, Hong Kong was run by the Brits and returned to China by the Brits. So I think going back to your real question, yes, I think that China would be happy with, as a starting point, first political talks with Taiwan. They say that they would like to have Taiwan's input into what kind of arrangements should be made. But at the end of the day, China wants Taiwan under Chinese rule. And it might initially allow some degree of economic freedom or something like that. But my expectation would be over time that China would clamp down on the nature of freedom in Taiwan. China doesn't want protests. There are no protests in Hong Kong. We see protests in Taiwan all the time.
Right.
Those would probably stop. Would Taiwan really be able to choose its own president and its representatives in the legislature? China would make sure that those that run for these positions are acceptable to Beijing, which is what they do in Hong Kong. So I think you have to get into the details before you just say, oh yeah, Hong Kong model would be acceptable.
Okay, fair enough. And so there was in a previous Polaris-Live, one of the guests mentioned that we should think about offshoring the highly sophisticated chip manufacturing facilities out of Taiwan, that for American and global security, that's probably something we should think about. I'd never thought about that before. You have any ideas on that, Bonnie?
Well, for people who understand the nature of chip production, manufacturing in Taiwan, they know that you have, of course, this globally known company, TSMC, supported by thousands of smaller companies. And they are all located within a very short distance from the fabs themselves.
Right.
So that might be in Tainan or in Hsinchu. But if there is something that is needed, some kind of an input, a component, or then they could get it to the fab within hours, in some cases even minutes. The talent, the education of these engineers it's world class, and it's truly unique. So the point is, there's an ecosystem in Taiwan that is very difficult to replicate. This is something that they're trying to do in Arizona. It is very costly. This is a national security decision. It is not being done because it is cheap to do. But the important decision to actually begin to produce these chips, have TSMC fabs outside the United States, so that if there were a crisis and these fabs in Taiwan were destroyed, at least the know-how and the capability would actually exist elsewhere. And it's my understanding that within the next few years, I can't remember if it's 2030, but I think it is, that the production of chips in the United States at the TSMC fabs in Arizona will be completely independent of Taiwan. They will not have to rely, for example, on chemicals that come from Taiwan to the United States and then get sent back, by the way, because we can't deal with the chemicals after they're used. So that's what I was told. It's very, very costly, but these fabs are going to be producing close to the most advanced chips. And the last thing that I would say is that it's extremely important to Taiwan to maintain capability and the most advanced chips, where you have to actually perfect the production of those chips before you can produce them at scale. And so the perfection process takes place, of course, at the fabs in Taiwan. So I think where we're at now, some people might say, oh, maybe we should shift the 40% production to the United States. We've even heard, I think, President Trump say 50% should be produced in the United States. I don't think that's going to happen in the near future. But at the end of the day, getting these capabilities to be produced elsewhere and outside of Taiwan was an important objective. That has been achieved. There's no need to offshore all of it. And that would be very harmful to Taiwan. That's the root of their prosperity. And despite what President Trump has said repeatedly, Taiwan did not steal the technology from the United States. We should give Morris Chang a lot of credit for starting TSMC, for creating this model where a company does not design the chips, but just creates a fab to manufacture the chips that other companies like NVIDIA design. So it's a partnership. They do not do both. And that didn't exist before TSMC.
You know, you have an amazing ability to take complicated issues and put them in layman's terms. No, you really do, and I really appreciate that. As we run out of time, a quick question, Bonnie. What is your own opinion of whether the summit between the two presidents was successful? There are many people who say just the fact that with all the differences, the two were able to get together and sit together and discuss together is success in and of itself. And I just wanted your thoughts before we close.
Well, that's a really important question, Sarwar. And I would say that I do think it's important that the presidents met. They're both the decision makers in their countries. They're very powerful. And I think that they have the potential, if they meet regularly and come to understandings, to manage some of the differences in the relationship and prevent them from getting out of hand. I don't oppose stability, but I am concerned that the Chinese introduce this concept of, or framework of, constructive strategic stability, because this is a Chinese defined term. And let's recall going all the way back to 2012 when Xi Jinping was vice president, and then later in 2013 when he was the leader of China, the general secretary of the party, and he met with President Obama, and he introduced the new model of great power relations. And this was defined by the Chinese: win-win cooperation and peaceful coexistence and mutual respect for each other's core interests. In other words, the things that are core to China are non-negotiable, and China has to respect, the United States has to respect and accept them. And that means Xinjiang, Tibet, Taiwan, maritime disputes, things of that nature. The same thing is true today in China's model or new concept that is put forward of constructive strategic stability. And I think the United States has ceded ground to China and enabled them now to create what will be referred to by Beijing as this new consensus between the two leaders. And as soon as the United States does something China objects to, maybe tighten restrictions on advanced technology transfer or sell arms to Taiwan, the Chinese will cry foul. They will say the United States has violated the consensus, and they will insist that the United States reverse its decision, and we will see problems in the relationship. So I worry about that. I think that our leader, our president, does not fully understand what he did in accepting China's framework of constructive strategic stability.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for taking the time to help our global audience think through these critical questions, Bonnie. I do hope you will come back to see us again. Thank you also to our viewers from around the world. Sorry I interrupted you, Bonnie.
I just said, of course. Thank you so much for having me, Sarwar.
It's always a pleasure and an education. So thank you. And I want to thank also our viewers from around the world for joining us on Polaris-Live.com as we continue to explore the most consequential relationship of our time between the United States and the People's Republic of China and its impact on the world. Until we see you again, goodbye.